are.
All right.
Third volume of
Yes,
of Pride and Prejudice. So this will be our, I believe we did one meeting per volume. So this will be our third meeting
yes.
for this book, and of course also the end of the story. I have some things. I'm not. I sound a little bit like a broken record, I think, about this. I am not as well put together as I kind of might hope to be as far as my reading and thinking. It's been a little busy here towards the end of the semester, but I definitely have some things in mind. You may have to wait a minute
That's okay.
as we talk about it while I find, because I don't have really copious notes pointing me to the pages.
Sure.
But I think I have experienced, if I may, I'll just kind of start us off with this. I think I've experienced a much more dramatic shift in feelings about characters and situations than I have in a very long time. And I know I read this
Yeah.
30 years ago.
Yeah, it's been a minute.
But most of it feels very fresh and new.
Yeah, same.
And I found myself pretty deeply invested. But also I will add there's a tinge of frustration in elements of this. But I want to hear kind of how you want to start things before I dive into particulars. What are you thinking?
I liked that way of talking about having a major shift in attitude toward the characters and the story between volumes 2 and 3. I do think some of the stuff we anticipated was coming did come, including I also like what you're saying about how I read this before too, and it feels new somehow. An interesting plot device that I guess I want to start off by talking about the significance of the Lydia plot device, because, you know, she's winding you up, and you're like, oh, it's coming, Darcy's softening on her. We're seeing him be this, like, gay gentleman with Bingley laughing and hanging out. It's, like, obvious to everyone except Lizzie, even Lizzie's uncle and aunt, that, oh, he's into you. And she's like, could he really be? And you're like, okay, it's coming. And then Austen's like, okay, wait, subplot. And it gives Darcy a chance to do heroic stuff off the page.
Right.
And that reader suspects that's what he was doing when he got all somber and walked off. There was some version of, okay, Wickham's my responsibility, I'll do it. But in the meantime, we were treated to like a couple of chapters of family freaking out. And the romance between Bingley and Jane, the romance between Lizzie and Darcy, kind of off the table for a minute. And the family's reputation is hanging in the balance, and we don't even know if Lydia might be pregnant. I mean, there's some fairly wild stakes, including the father, you know, at first being like, I will never speak to her again. I mean, he does repent because Jane and Lizzie work on him, but boy, it pisses him off. And he's been all affable and like, oh, let her go to Brighton. We talked about this last time. Yeah. Doesn't matter what people think. Now, all of a sudden, it fucking matters, doesn't it, buddy? Well, so I want to know your thoughts on the Lydia subplot or anything that I said.
I think this Lydia subplot is fantastic and shocking and impeccably timed.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like volume 3, like it's a little up and down.
Yeah.
But I feel like the opening 10 chapters of volume 3 are just pyrotechnic.
Yes.
I mean, because volume 2 ends with that very kind of like I kept saying, like Mike Myers. Who's the bad guy?
The Dr. Evil.
Yeah, the Dr. Evil guy. You know, the last to Pemberley, therefore they were to go. Everybody knows.
Everybody knows, and you even said, oh, he's going to be out washing his car with no shirt on, and that was basically what happened. You know?
He's going to be there.
Yeah.
It's going to be awkward. There's going to be feelings that are like unexpected on all sides.
Yeah.
Right. And so, boom. Yeah. I mean, we are given this right away.
Yeah.
And so let me just kind of put my cards on the table. I like Mr. Darcy by the end of this novel. This does not mean that I necessarily think that Mr. Darcy is a good man. I think that the way he behaves in the first half, maybe first 2/3 of this book, is inexcusable.
Which, to be fair, he says to her.
And Elizabeth making the choice, which has some interesting echoes.
The line that got him was when she said, "You proposed to me and you did not act like a gentleman." Right. And I think that changed his life.
And he pondered on that.
Yeah, he thought about that in the way that you're supposed to when someone says that to you.
Yeah, I mean, like that cold water hit him, and he did the right thing.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's one of those things where, and to be fair, right, we all have these elements of our past that you know we'd rather just not talk about.
He's 25,
right?
Isn't he, or 28?
Something
It's
like that.
It's not. So
yeah,
and he's been spoiled, as he says. I was an only child, blah blah blah. But I hear you.
All that.
Yeah.
And I'll reiterate. By the end of this book, I like him.
Yeah.
And mostly I like his ability to be humble in the face of this kind of difficult truth about himself.
Yeah.
And to even like have a little fun with it before the book's done.
Yeah.
But you know, at the same time, you know, when he arrives unexpectedly there at Pemberley at the beginning, you know, chapter 2, chapter 1.
I think it's 1.
You know, I mean, it feels like just a blink.
Yeah.
And then there they are again.
Yeah, it's 1. Chapter 1's kind of long. It's like 10 pages.
Yeah, when he first shows up again, I mean, there's this part of it that's just like,
more snootiness.
Mr. Darcy.
Yeah,
you know? And even like the friendliness of it, which we come to realize is genuine and well meant.
He like tells Gardner he can fish there whenever he wants, and you know,
right, and all of that, right? So, you know, I have a hard time. Like I think a month from now, like Elizabeth Bennet, I'm going to feel better about Darcy than I do right now. But I think I need like some time to process a little bit more. I sort of just finished the book, and I buy it all.
If I can add something in here, I think this is always the mark of a great movie to me. Like when I talk to my friends about, like you and I just saw John Wick 4, and while we both agreed it was kind of uneven, it does the same thing the first 3 did, in that I find myself still thinking about it. So often, you know, I'll see a movie and it's fine, but then I just, like, I'm kind of done with it.
Right.
This book has that. I love what you're saying. I think it's also true of books. Like, you know, like, we're going to be thinking about this for a while, and maybe our attitudes towards these characters, videos like this, papers that you write, even for an article, sometimes it's weird to be an academic, because it's like, this is my last word, but no, it's not. It never is, you know.
I'm sure that I'm going to feel differently about it. And I think I will also say, I'd be willing to bet that 25-year-old me, you know, who's probably maybe even 20-year-old me reading this novel, probably was a lot easier on Darcy than I'm being now.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, but the other thing that's really nice about this, and this is kind of where your question comes in, which I think is the question about Volume 3.
The Lydia subplot, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
That this is woven together, right? I mean, there are 3 engagements.
Yeah.
In Volume 3.
Yeah.
And these are all kind of woven together in these various, like they're all problems at the same time that they're all opportunities, but the charge, the moral and social charge of each one of them is so different.
Yeah.
And I think they balance each other, like plot-wise, this is just a masterstroke, the way that Austen puts all these together. And so, I mean, I was genuinely affected. I was alarmed when they got the news about Lydia. I was like, oh, no, they didn't.
Yeah.
And then again, I don't know, 30 pages later, when I read it as Wickham essentially kidnapping her. And then, like another 10 or 15 pages in, becomes clear that she's gone willingly.
Yeah.
And like, I'm like, oh, you know, I feel like an Amy Adams character in an early movie, just like, no,
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like everything else is and I was just like scandalized by this in this
Yeah,
way that I
yeah.
did not see
Right.
coming.
Right, well, and I think that, the father coming out of his lethargy is the same, he almost is like you, right? Like, he's like, oh, shit, I can't just chill in my library anymore.
Right.
Like, he goes to fight. He tries to have a duel. And the mother, in a way, I still think the mother is the weakest part of this book. I don't want to distract from what you're saying. I just want to throw in here, like, the mother's feelings are so one-dimensional. It's like, she's like, oh, don't go fight, you'll die, and then we'll be put out. But, oh, now that they're getting married, let's welcome them, and I love my son-in-law. And it's like everything is just what immediately serves her in a way that I think is just a little bit of a cheap shot from Austen.
She's too,
Like, I don't
she's
love
too
it.
flat, in
Yeah.
a book full of such round characters.
But the father can
She's
change.
embarrassingly flat.
And then the narrator even says, I wish I could say she changed. It's like,
Right.
well, like, I don't know, like, if it's just me or it's like, yeah, it feels a little rough. But anyway, go ahead.
Well,
so you were scandalized, you were saying.
Yeah, well, but I guess what I was trying to get to was there is this incredible, I think, palette of emotional response, and I feel I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. I feel well managed without being manipulated. Like I feel like this startlement and really this sorrow about Lydia's situation. She's just bad values and doesn't really understand
And super young.
the problems that she's creating for herself and for her family, on the one hand. But then you have this, I think, very sweet, without being saccharine, return of Bingley that really feels like a kind of promise of something. Like, oh, this Lydia thing is a hot mess, but Bingley coming back and obviously, being thrilled by the kind of realization that he can just marry Jane.
Yeah.
It's sweet. It's
Yeah.
genuinely
Yeah.
sweet, and it's warm, and he's like spending all day in the sitting room, and it's just like, it's wonderful, right?
Yeah.
And then the Darcy thing, it's so complicated that they all have this weird palette of emotional register. But I want to circle back to Mr. Bennet for a second, because I think that what you're talking about with him, in some ways, I want to say that Volume 3 is as much about him as anybody else. And
It's amazing how much she pulls off in Volume 3.
Well,
because,
in Chapter 8, 209, it starts, Mr. Bennet had very often wished, before this period of his life, that instead of spending his whole income, he had laid by an annual sum for the better provision of his children and of his wife. He now wished it more than ever. Had he done this duty and respect, Lydia need not have been indebted to her uncle. This is before they know about Darcy, which, by the way, his reaction to that is priceless.
Yes.
It was like, oh, I won't have to pay him back.
Right.
He'll want to impress me.
Yes, yes.
But this is an interesting moment. This is a dude. I mean, we've been having conversations about various guys who kind of haven't figured out.
Yeah.
Mostly in the context of how we don't.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who really thought he had it figured out, and now, like Darcy, has been kind of confronted with this reality of his own making, I guess. And he's like, man, I really wish I'd done things differently.
Yeah.
But underneath this all is this business about the entail.
Yeah.
That they had always,
If they just had a son.
well, they had always just thought that they'd have a son.
Yeah.
And then they could drop the entail, and then everybody's provided for.
Yeah.
And in a way, I hear like my old high school PE coaches, if wishes were whatever,
Yeah.
But on the other hand, this is not a really unreasonable. I mean, 5 kids and
Right.
none of them boys. I mean,
Yeah.
what are the odds?
Yeah, right.
And so part of me, I feel like part of the joy of Volume 3 is to see this ripening of an already very fun character into something that is sort of fun, but with this kind of maturity that really kind of expresses a little bit more of how he ended up he's not dumb.
Right.
He's genuinely unlucky in a system that's not exactly stacked in his favor to
Right.
begin with.
Right.
I mean, I say that like he's not still part of the 1%,
Right.
whatever. But this recognition that he might have done things differently.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, at the same time that we've gotten very comfortable by chapter 8, um, you know, um, you know, judging Wickham for his bad financial stuff,
Yeah.
his gambling.
Yeah.
But I mean, what was this business with the son for the Bennetts, if not a kind of gambling?
Yeah, they're scandalized about gambling, and I guess I'll add to that, since we're talking about Mr. Bennett, and I'll be damned if I can find the page. But I also just briefly want to talk about Collins's letter to him.
Oh, that's fantastically Collins, isn't it?
Where he's like,
202.
yeah, the line
201.
the line that stands out to me, if I can find it, yeah, it's
It's this line, right?
the death of your daughter. Yeah, the death of your daughter would have been a blessing in comparison to this. But there was also something about being a Christian that I was like, damn, Austen briefly engaged religion.
Oh, this is later. This is the letter after Elizabeth
Okay.
has.
Well, there's a moment where Collins says in the letter,
Right.
you should, as a Christian, you should of course forgive Lydia,
But that doesn't mean.
but don't ever let her in the house again.
Right.
And Bennett pauses and he goes, that's an interesting definition of Christianity.
Right.
Like, and I was like, oh, Austen getting a little, like, I don't know, that felt like a big moment to me in terms of like what you're saying too about
Right.
and I can't remember where that is, but
it's like 250-ish, something like that.
But I guess like yes to all these things about Mr. Bennett. They do remain in the end, the father anyway does remain pretty standoffish from Lydia. He doesn't have much interest in seeing her. He forbids Kitty from ever visiting her in Wickham. So it's kind of left up to Jane and Elizabeth to be family for Lydia. Like, you feel like in some ways, Lydia was cut off, and perhaps that's not the coolest thing. I mean, if it was the coolest thing, then Jane and Lizzie wouldn't still be, active sisters. So, I'm a little annoyed that as part of his growth,
Right.
it's almost like he's taking out on Lydia some of his own hang-ups about mistakes he made. And it's like, she's a 17-year-old girl, she got caught up with a scoundrel. These things happen in life. Are you really going to disown your daughter for choosing badly for a husband?
When you don't do your job,
I'm reminded of Roseanne. I mean, if you remember
it feels
Roseanne,
a bit like a Roseanne.
when Becky runs off with Mark,
Right.
and for the longest time, the John Goodman character won't talk to her, and the Roseanne writers are making it clear this is Dan being the asshole. Like, we get that Mark was annoying, and Roseanne did everything she could to stop Becky from marrying Mark, but in the end, so she picked.
Yeah.
So you're just gonna be a dick now,
Right. Well, it's a lot of weight, right? I mean.
Yeah.
Lydia's a 16-year-old girl.
Yeah.
Who has been allowed, one might even argue, encouraged to be an airhead all summer.
Right.
Right. And then is like sent off to Daytona.
Right. That basically the written version.
With very little in the way of adult supervision, and this thing happens and everybody's mad and they're like, I can't believe you didn't think about the social ramifications for your sisters. And it's like, really? You can't believe that?
Right. Right.
You were never 16, caught up in a moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it does seem unfair. Although it also seems, well, here's part of what's interesting, right? And this came up in Sense and Sensibility as well. One of the things that's really interesting about this world is the information that people know and share, and the information that people don't share, right? And so there's that scene in Sense and Sensibility where forgetting all the characters' names already, but Colonel, what's his name,
Oh shit.
was going to offer
Yeah.
the guy.
Colonel
Colonel
Brandon.
Brandon was going to offer the destitute husband the parsonage.
Yes.
Right. But there was this misunderstanding that he was actually proposing marriage to
Yeah,
his sister.
yeah.
And there, and it's a very similar kind of thing here with Wickham, right? Where Jane and Lizzie know the truth by way of this letter.
From Darcy. Yeah.
But they don't share it.
Yeah.
For very good reason, but also they don't share it.
Right.
And Lizzie is totally unprepared. Although not Lizzie, Lydia is totally unprepared. Although one has the sense that it wouldn't have mattered. Like she thought she loved him.
Well, we have to remember that even though it's like, of course, the point is to be disgusted by Wickham, he's a very good womanizer. I mean, A, he had Lizzie's attention early. Right. B, in the letter, Darcy makes clear that he damn near got away with marrying Georgiana.
Yeah.
So, and now Lydia, it's like, okay, this is one of those guys that like women dig. And those guys existed in 1790, just like they exist in 2023. And so, for a 16-year-old girl without a lot of moral compass, whose father's in the library all the time, whose mother's indulging every whim, let's not all get shocked when she makes some bad decisions,
Which, to be fair, like in some ways, not even that bad.
Right. So I want to shift gears a little bit. One of the things that I was charmed by this time is some of the revolution in my head about the way Darcy handles his love for Lizzie down the home stretch. Not the Lydia part, but there's another part that at first I was like, this is bullshit. And then the more I thought about it, the more I thought, no, that's like what everyone does. And what I'm talking about is the fact that it seems to me he went around telling like his friends and family, including Georgiana. Like he told a lot of people he was into Lizzie before Lizzie knew. And so people start acting differently around her. Right? Georgiana's like, oh, I want to meet her. And then, Lady Catherine rolls in and she's like, what's this? And I'm like, Darcy, how come you're going around like telling everybody how dope Elizabeth is, except Elizabeth? And then I thought, oh, but that's like what we all did. Like almost all, like if you think about it, like, it's almost like classic high school through college dating. Like all your buddies know you're into the girl before the girl ever does, and vice versa.
Well, the cliche, right, is that everybody knows in a way even before you do.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And there's even the bit, Mrs. Gardner.
Yeah.
Who is totally convinced that Darcy's going to propose, like while they're at Pemberley.
Yeah.
And Lizzie gets kind of mad.
Yeah.
She's like, don't go put that on me.
Yeah.
And then like, a month later, she's like, okay. But yeah, I think them as a couple, like once they've established that and by the way, like this kind of like, he likes her, she doesn't like him, she likes him, but she doesn't think he likes her, reversal, I mean, it's a cliche, but I'll ride that horse all day long. It's just a fabulous...
It's what we were talking about the other day. I mean, there may be problems with it, but the idea that, like, it takes a rocky road to get there. Yeah. There's a reason why rom-coms dine out to lunch on it every time. Right, it's because people either we relate or we wish we did. Maybe it's a combination of both, but yes.
But once they are past that, once they have, like, learned how to talk to each other, they're just a great couple, and we've said this before, and I'm sure we'll say it again. They're so modern feeling.
Yeah.
I mean, even just the kind of like the way they drop the pretense of manner and the formality, and I just on page 260, I was just really impressed with this conversation.
Yeah. I called this the debrief.
Yeah.
Like all couples do this.
Yeah, they're like,
remember how we got together?
So what happened?
Yeah.
So what was I'm confused about
that.
Yeah. And he's just like, and they're telling these truths.
Yeah.
That I think are just kind of fascinating. she says, so when did you realize you liked me?
Yeah.
You know? And he's like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And she's
I
like,
cannot fix the hour.
Yeah, I love, I was in the middle of it before I knew it had begun.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm kind of putting that one in my back pocket.
Yeah.
For an appropriate moment.
Yeah.
You know.
I like her haughty response.
Yeah.
My beauty you had early withstood. It's like, look, I know I'm hot.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's also this like.
It's
poke.
ironic.
It's
Yeah.
this poke,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
You know that I know you said I was no great beauty.
Right.
Right. Which she can say to him now.
Forever. She
Right.
can rub
Right.
that in. Yeah.
And even like probably come to like it.
Yes.
You know, in a way.
Yeah.
You know, like it's just very easy for me to think that part of what she admires about him is that he was able to find reason to love her, even though he didn't think she was beautiful, right?
Yeah.
But then there's this kind of the paragraph right after that, like, now be sincere. Did you admire me for my impertinence?
Yes.
She's playing.
Yes,
right?
she's totally playing with
I mean,
him.
this is totally like what I'm feeling is like drunk Phoebe from Friends.
Yeah.
She's like, tell me why.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
But instead, he changes the gears on her. He's like telling real truth.
Yeah.
He goes, no, for the liveliness of your mind.
Yeah.
And I was struck.
That's another one to have in your pocket.
I was affected.
Yeah.
By this that ultimately what he did was get rattled.
Yeah.
And I think this is a totally fair, and this is where I really start to kind of turn the dial a little bit on Darcy. He's this sheltered dude, spoiled, mama's boy. We find out from Lady Catherine, like raised from the cradle to marry his cousin.
Yeah.
Who has never seen anything in the world like Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And at his first sort of interaction with her, he recoils because this is just completely alien.
Yeah.
But I read in that sentence, I read everything that he goes on to say later that like he recoiled, but then it kept coming back, and he was just intrigued. But once he figured out how to decode that, once he figured out how to break out of his bullshit,
Yeah.
he realized like what a gem, what a incredibly rare and valuable thing this was.
I agree with all that. And speaking of her playfulness, there's, I don't know if this combination of moments struck you, but so first when they're at Pemberley at the beginning on 167, there's the famous moment where she sees the grounds for the first time, and it's it is wealth. That third paragraph of chapter 1, it's like just pure, like this is the stuff. And we're told on 167, and of this place thought she, I might have been mistress! ! And then she says, but no, that could have never be. My uncle and aunt would have been lost to me. I should not have been allowed to invite them. This was a lucky recollection. It saved her from something like regret. So she's like, in danger of regretting, like, damn, I could have really had all this stuff. There's a materialism, right? And she plays with it a little bit in her banter with Jane, which I find quite lovely because it's totally how they would talk as close sisters. Over on 255, I actually posted about this on Facebook. I was like, this is brilliant. The last two paragraphs. First, Jane says, my dearest sister, now be serious. I want to talk very seriously. Let me know everything I am to know without delay. Will you tell me how long you have loved him? So this is kind of like Jane doing to her what she later does to... And Elizabeth says, it has been coming on so gradually that I hardly know when it began, but I believe I must date it from my first seeing his beautiful grounds at Pemberley. And just because of the luck of bookmaking, that ends the page in our edition. And you know she's kidding, but there's a moment where you're turning the page where you're like, oh shit. Like, she's just kind of telling it. Yeah. And then another entreaty that she would be serious, however, produces. So they're like, yes, we all know she's kidding, but... Yeah, but they're just the same. And even though she's kidding me, it is true. It's just true. And I don't think Austen is embarrassed by this at all. That, Lizzie has every right to take this into account. Oh, yeah. I mean, this is why Lady Catherine's freaking out. It's why Miss Bingley wanted to marry him. Like you can say, oh, don't be a gold digger, don't be this, don't be that. But like, guess you were saying about Lucy and Sense and Sensibility, it's like, well, I thought my job was to get all the money. Like, that's what
Yeah.
you're, Collins is gonna kick
Right.
us out of the house,
Right.
you know? There is a way in which that's both funny and I think somewhat, like, yeah, she played to win and she won. Like, now Austin keeps insisting she also really likes the guy, but on some level, I think there's a playfulness of materialism
Well,
there.
yeah, and you know, I think the business with Lady Catherine is great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And partly because it is this kind of send up of materialism, right?
Yeah.
That if Lady Catherine had just held her tongue, probably they wouldn't get married, right? I mean,
Well, Darcy would have had to have found another way to work up his courage. Like,
Well-
she ticked him off.
well, it
and,
wasn't even just that she ticked him off.
And convinced him that Liz would think about it.
Right, because
Yeah.
this is the thing that I thought was great, right? That Lady Catherine comes home all steamed because Elizabeth won't just flat out say, "I won't marry him,"
Right.
and Darcy's like,
Really? Did she
wouldn't.
say that?
She
Yeah.
wouldn't say it,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, and so like partly he's annoyed,
Yeah.
but I think what really comes out of that conversation is this realization that she hasn't taken that off the table, and he's
Yeah.
like, I gotta get down to Longford. and
Yeah, yeah,
see-
I got somewhere to be.
I gotta go talk to her
Yeah,
and see what this is all about.
yeah.
And so if Lady Catherine hadn't been, you know, so pompous and so sure of herself, and just kind of let this thing happen, you know, or let this thing lie, I guess. Is the way
Yes.
to
Oh,
say it.
yes.
It wouldn't have happened, is my read. And so there's this kind of interesting, I think, moral judgment there, right? That it's her greed that undoes these plans that she has for her daughter.
And I'm not sure if it's just greed because she gets so brutal that Elizabeth is finally like, listen, this conversation's over. Because it's not like Lady Catherine isn't loaded forever. It's not like her daughter won't also be.
Well,
There
it's
is
greed.
a despisement of Lizzie
Yes.
and her family. There is a real class issue here that Austin hates.
It's a
That's not really even about money, you know.
No.
Because Lizzie's like, my dad is a gentleman,
right.
and Catherine's like, fine, that's true, but
Right.
you're all still trash
Right.
anyway.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
brutal.
Oh yeah.
It's
yeah,
about a
and the
little
greed,
more than money.
The greed's not personal, though.
Yeah,
This is-
yeah.
I think you're right. It's this class greed that what Lady Catherine can't stand is
Yes.
the idea of these people who aren't like already sort of approved by her standard taking part in this wealth.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm, mhm.
It's the pool scene in Caddyshack,
Mhm.
right? It's the fear that these ruffians are going to somehow pollute this thing, and you know, to be honest, seeing Lady Catherine behave this way made me rethink Darcy a little bit and be like, oh, okay. So like he grew up in a world where this was considered like normal, so he had some unlearning to
Well,
do.
you pointed out that Lady Catherine's behavior in Volume 2 we were
Yeah.
supposed to think of as unladylike and just as embarrassing as
Right.
Elizabeth's mother.
Right.
It's just that because she has the money, she can get away with it.
Right.
And now we see her being like super ugly.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah. No, I thought this was that there's that kind of language of frankness
Mm-hmm.
in that.
Mm-hmm.
This is 241, I think.
Mhm.
Yeah, about 2/3 of the way down. Miss Bennet replied her ladyship in an angry tone. You ought to know that I'm not to be trifled with, but however insincere you may choose to be, you shall not find me so. My character has ever been celebrated for its sincerity and frankness.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, celebrated maybe is the wrong word, but I think sincerity and frankness is something that people are like, full aware that what they're going to get from her. And it's this ability of Elizabeth's, which I think comes from her father,
Mm-hmm.
to be equally sincere and frank.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, to kind of like
Even in the face of somebody who is her social
in
superior.
this kind of egalitarian,
Yeah, yeah.
I'll put my pants on, one leg at a time sort of way,
Yeah, yeah.
kind of way. That I think is just great that she plays the game to the extent that she continues to sort of speak in the tones of, you know, this genteel world, but it's really interesting. And then we see echoes of maybe where that came from in the letter that Mr. Bennett sends back to Collins.
Oh Lord, yes.
Which is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's a really short little note.
Yeah.
It's on page 262. It's almost at the end.
Almost at the very end, right?
Yeah, why don't you read that for the camera? That'll be good.
And yeah, he says, "I must trouble you once more for congratulations."
Yeah.
It's just fantastic.
Yeah.
Right? Elizabeth will soon be the wife of Mr. Darcy. Console Lady Catherine as well as you can, but if I were you, I'd stand by the nephew. He has more to give.
Yeah.
And the nephew, the husband, like the way these things are framed in the book, I think it's really interesting in a lot of ways. And so, you know, there is this kind of I don't know, Rousseauian kind of natural superiority at play here, right? The Bennets are just actually better people. They're smarter, they're quicker, they're livelier. You know, Lady Catherine, you know.
They have this in common with the Dashwoods.
Yes, and I suspect with all
Well, the
of
people we're going to meet in the next book.
right.
Yeah.
All of the protagonists are these kind of like lively daddy's girls who read a lot and are good at thinking and speaking
And have some moral compass.
Yeah.
Speaking of moral compass, you know, we talked a lot about Darcy's proposal. Well, okay, two things. Number one, I like how Austen prefers to not let you see the actual proposal. She did it with Eleanor and whoever, I can't remember. And here even with Jane and Bingley, no dice.
Right.
It's like they get their privacy.
Right.
That is something that Austen won't dialogue out.
Right.
She doesn't really do it for Darcy and Elizabeth either, but she comes close.
Right. Well, the real thing she won't. Right? We get to see the failure.
You don't get to see him on his knees saying, "Will you marry me?" That is a private thing. Is what I'm starting to see Austen saying.
Even the conversation with Mr. Bennett.
Yeah.
You know, we see Elizabeth come up afterwards.
And I find those to be interesting choices from Austen that I want to meditate on a little bit more. Like some things, even with fictional characters, deserve privacy. But we talked a lot about his first proposal, which we did see. And we talked about how we can see how it's sexy, but it's also kind of like, oh, I've struggled and I've overcome it. And, you know, in a way, kind of a dick proposal. Look at this line on 250. This kind of reinforces your point about his growth. He says, this is his opening shot. "You are too generous to trifle with me. If your feelings are still what they were last April, tell me so at once. My affections and wishes are unchanged, but one word from you will silence me on this subject forever." That is such a different opening effort than making it all about himself and his struggle and how he surrendered, and of course she'll say yes. Like, there's a subordination of himself to her here that I think is what Austen was waiting. You know, he had to get there before Elizabeth would say yes. I just found the contrast of those proposals to be so interesting.
And later in that paragraph, right, the paragraph after that is all about Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And again, like everything, the camera pulls way out. We don't actually hear what she says.
Right.
We get a summary.
She gave him to understand that she cared.
Right.
Yes.
And then even towards the end, had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eye, right? Because she's sort of embarrassed.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of weird to be like, I know I said I'd be with you forever, but I don't really.
Just kidding. Yeah.
Kind of thinking different things now.
Yeah.
Had Elizabeth been able to encounter his eye, she might have seen how well the expression of heartfelt delight diffused over his face became him.
Yeah.
Right? So it's almost like it sort of, he needed this thing, this connection with her, in order to sort of finally become this good man.
Yeah, became is a double, it's a poetic use of it.
Yeah. And it's really nice that it's almost, it's like the last little voice of the Who that finally swelled the Grinch's heart.
Yeah.
You know, and I think this is really it's fascinating. But at the same time, I think it's really interesting. Not to make this all about Lydia exactly, but I think it's really interesting that part of this change of heart that Elizabeth is feeling really seems to come to light when she discovers that it's Darcy who has made things work out for Lydia.
Yeah, I mean, she was already warming to him, but
Yeah.
that blows her away.
Yeah, well, in a way, the letter the day after she rejects him
Yeah.
kind of starts this process,
Yes.
which is both kind of like charming and infuriating.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
like, damn, girl, like you really couldn't just say like, give me a minute to think about it.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
know?
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, she would have solved a lot of people's problems.
Yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
off the bat.
Yeah.
But it's this revelation that she's not supposed to receive.
Yeah.
That Darcy pays off Wickham's gambling debts, promises to buy him a commission in the regular army, settles his like bill in London.
Yeah, because
I mean,
with the unwashed tradesmen, he owed
Yeah.
them money, but he also owed
These
debts of
honorable
honor
debts.
with the gamblers.
yeah, with the other
Isn't that
gentleman.
interesting that when you gamble, that's a debt of honor, but you can like fleece the tailor
Right.
and everyone's fine with it?
Right.
Like that's weird.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this is a thing, actually, the timing is a little bit different, but this is a thing I work on occasionally when I'm doing my like antebellum Southern stuff.
mm,
And one of the worst things that a gentleman can do, and this actually comes back to, I'm going to bring this back to what I was going to say about Elizabeth in a minute. But one of the most problematic things a gentleman could do in the Old South was give another gentleman a gift.
yeah,
Because gifts are things that you give to subordinates.
yeah,
And so in order to articulate his equality to, the other gentleman, the guy who received the gift now has to give a gift back.
yeah,
It becomes an obligation to
Yeah.
give. And this happens in real life. You see this. We have a neighbor, for instance, who is really a very nice woman at her heart, but she's deeply committed to getting us to go to her church,
yeah,
and takes another stab at it every 4 months,
yeah,
and usually in the form of like cookies and a conversation over the fence,
yeah,
and a reminder that there's like this cool thing happening, and just so happens to be at a church service,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and part of me is just kind of like we've made ourselves pretty clear about this,
Yeah.
and I'm a little annoyed, but I'm also a little annoyed that I can't just kind of like write off those cookies, right? Now
Yeah.
I got to do something back.
That's right.
And it worked sort of like this, and so there's even a line. Where is it? On 223,
Mhm.
222, 223.
Mhm.
Right at the end of 222, it was painful, exceedingly painful, to know that they were under obligations to a person who could never receive a return.
Yeah,
They owed the restoration of Lydia, her character, everything to him. Oh, how heartily did she grieve over every ungracious sensation she'd ever encouraged, every saucy speech she'd ever directed to him. For herself, she was humbled, but she was proud of him.
yeah,
And so there's this kind of complicated thing happening here.
yeah,
And I know, the thing about, well, I fell in love with him when I saw his estate,
Yeah.
it's a joke. But there's this really complex series of things here. There's this debt of honor. There's that he has, without intending to, right? Because this is why it's secret, and this is why, in a way, and the book doesn't even really lean on this, but this is one of the reasons that I think Darcy has become a good. This is one of the reasons I think that Darcy has become a good guy is that this is secret because he understands that if it's public, he will put them under obligation.
Yeah.
He's not trying to do it. He's
Yeah.
just genuinely trying to. Like,
And
help.
Lizzie sort of strong arms Mrs. Gardner into telling her, she's
Right.
like, well, if you don't, I will cause
Keep
problems.
bothering you.
Yeah, yeah,
And yeah, and so in a way, there's this. But now that she knows, I have to admit, there will always be this slight doubt,
yeah,
right? And I think that Jane Austen is like hitting the nail right on the head. That man, like in our sort of like stupid little monkey brains, obligation and love, boy, they're real close to each other. And there's this part of me that wonders if maybe what happened here. And I know by the time we get to the end of the book, I feel more confident about their relationship.
Because of the conversations they're having,
Yeah.
and Georgiana seeing her
Yeah.
take liberties with her
Yeah,
husband.
right.
Yeah.
But there's also just a little touch of something in there that's like, I mean, I know enough women to know that there are times in women's lives where they just go like, I owe him a date or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not about deep, heartfelt feeling as much as it's a kind of
Because of all the stuff he did.
social obligation
Yeah.
or moral obligation or something like that. And it's interesting to me that one of the things in the backdrop of Lydia's like utter disregard to any obligation,
Right.
even
Right.
though she's 16,
Yeah.
you know, here's Elizabeth, I think really feeling the heavy weight of this obligation.
Yeah.
And I'm a little intrigued. I don't want to sort of suggest that she doesn't love him, but I'm a little intrigued at the possibility that maybe what's happening here is a little bit of a kind of like general human crosswire where owing somebody something and loving them is like really hard to tell apart sometimes.
I agree with all that, and yet, from Darcy's perspective, I mean, and I don't know if this is completely true or not, but I can see why he blames himself for what happened to Lydia. He feels like, you know, his own sort of, in a way, he's a lot like Mr. Bennett, because Mr. Bennett is like, he won't deign to, you know, engage the people who are foolish, right? He's like, well, if they're going to think that, fine, right? Obviously, as we see, he changes. Darcy, kind of same thing. He's like, well, I know Wickham's a scoundrel. I don't need to tell any. Like, I know. That's all that matters.
Well, and he's
so,
cleaned up Wickham's messes in the past.
Yes.
And there is this kind of like, kind of real thing, you know. There's this kind of, I think, kind of fringy Gary Oldman movie called Romeo is Bleeding that I like a lot. It's like a weird, like dirty cop movie, and he shoots a woman part of a complicated heist. He shoots a woman, and then she gets away, and this sort of like wise old dude, you know, that's in this kind of criminal, you know, kind of subculture, says to him at one point, shoot somebody, you might as well marry him. You're gonna be in your life forever.
Yeah.
And sure enough, the woman does reappear later. And I kind of feel like there's a little something there with Wickham and Darcy, right? That he's cleaned up the mess once, and that means in a way he's responsible forever.
And so he decides it was a mistake on his part, I think because of that responsibility, to allow the whole village of Meryton, including Longbourn, to have this fantasy of him as just some dashing, harmless guy.
Right. Instead of sitting there quietly, he should have said, "No, don't interact with him."
And so he's put in a complicated position because, like you said, I mean, he knows better. He knows he should keep it secret because he wants Elizabeth to love him for like the right reasons. He doesn't want her to come him out of this very powerful obligation you're talking about. Yeah, he also probably should. I mean, by his morals, definitely should. And really by my light too, he probably should have went in and fixed this. I mean, he certainly got the money to do it. Lydia was stupid. It's no reason for her life to be thrown away. And, you know, like, I love how we're told, well, they had several long conversations, but we didn't hear those either. But, you know, part of it was him telling Wickham, listen, you motherfucker, you're not going to ruin her. Like, you're going to marry her, we're going to work this out. Like, I know you want something for it. So let's figure that out. But one thing you're not going to do is you're not just going to walk away from this mess.
Well, and then that comes back.
Yeah.
With the letter from Lydia.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, she's like, well, now he wants a royal appointment.
Right.
It's like, oh, is that all?
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think what we're supposed to understand is that like, Lydia, to some degree, Lydia is lost forever. Lydia is her mother's daughter.
Yeah.
But we're told, like, not Kitty.
Right.
Kitty has become, and there's the great line, I won't get the line quite right, but there's something about, like, because Jane marries Bingley and Elizabeth marries Darcy, that Kitty is exposed to this elevated society and thus improved. And I found myself really kind of really kind of like testing that one a little bit,
Yeah.
and thinking like, really, is that what you think, Jane Austen? Because that doesn't sound like what you usually think.
That's right. That's
you
right.
know,
Yeah. Yes, because the whole because you have to be careful there because you're almost close to saying soldiers are trash. Because the truth is that according to Marrington, these soldiers are gentlemen also. You know, if Wickham hadn't been a scoundrel, it would have been fine for Lydia to marry a soldier in the eyes of Mr. Bennet.
Right, right.
So now, though, the implication is, oh yeah, those filthy soldiers, Lydia won't have to date them anymore.
It's maybe,
you know.
man, it's maybe. I mean, I think that's part of it, but I think it's also, I think, kind of hinting that Lady Catherine maybe wasn't wrong, that Mrs. Bennet is also trash.
That's right.
You know, and that getting Lydia,
Getting Kitty out of Mrs. Bennett's influence.
yeah, or at least exposing her to this other version of things, you know, so that you know, as a reasonably right-thinking woman, you know, she's going to recognize that, of course, the version of this that I see at Bingley and Darcy's houses is superior to what I grew up with, and you know, I mean, fair enough, but it does.
It's a little snobbish.
There's this kind of interesting,
Yeah.
you know, and I don't know, I don't know quite what to make all of it, but I think, you know, I guess end of the day, what I really liked about this is the just absolute masterpiece of plotting. Even, I mean, it was pretty clear a couple chapters in what was going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, there was some question about, you know, is Lydia just regular ruined, or like ruined and married,
Yeah.
or what? But this you know, the basic outcome was pretty set. But the kind of neatness, the way that the plot kind of allowed each different strand to kind of create tension in other strands, and and the way that it really allowed us to feel this full spectrum of things, from, you know, dismay to just kind of like, you know, kind of the, you know, really comforting kind of like of course Bingley is going to marry Jane, to the more complex and thorny, you know, this Darcy thing seems like it could work.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I you know, I think ultimately, I think this one kind of nailed the ending in a way that I think Sense and Sensibility did.
We did not feel this. We felt like Sense and Sensibility. It was ironic because the thing I loved about the first two volumes was that it was so patient in dragging everything out.
Right.
But I think Austen kind of backs herself in the last 20 pages, she's like, okay, now I have to.
Right.
You know, whereas this one, the pacing's a little faster in the beginning, and as a result, she doesn't have to hurry in the end.
Yeah, and she really sets herself up to have exactly the right space for what she needs in volume 3, and does such a great job of kind of playing, you know, each thing off itself, and has established a really good foundation for the things that happen. There's nothing that happens in volume 3 that I'm like, no, where'd that come from? It's all already there.
And I mean, just, I guess my final word about it is, I think like you know, I finished because we're at the end of the semester, I only finished last night.
Yeah.
So, you know, and I'm assuming we will continue to use Norton editions, partly because the editing is good, partly because of the paratext, and I just didn't get a chance to read.
Yeah.
But this edition has like a bunch of letters from Jane Austen to her aunt and other family members. It's also got some criticism in the back that obviously I didn't get a chance to read, but I am very curious, including this treatment of Pride and Prejudice and zombies that I bet is funny.
Yeah, which I've read. Have you read that one?
No.
Yeah,
But,
I read that one.
But,
It's not bad.
yeah, but this makes me want to see what some good criticism of the novel has said. I wonder if they're saying things like what we're saying, or if they focus on stuff that is more like Victorian specialists, which neither of us are. I'm curious what people have to say about like the Lydia subplot, for example, and Mr. Bennet's evolution, and Darcy, the difference in his proposals. I mean, I can't help but feel some of the things we're talking about have been on scholars' minds.
Right.
But then, of course, there's so much more
Mm.
when it's your area and
Right.
your, you know.
No,
Yeah.
I think, I think there could be room maybe for a conversation at some point in the future where we just kind of look at some of this paratext
Yeah.
and just kind of see how that lines up with
Yeah.
our reading of the book.
Yeah.
And whether it surprises us the things that people are focusing on.
Yeah.
You know, certainly I think would be an interesting thing. I know I'm going to end up doing a little, you know, sort of basic sort of MLA database searching, just to kind of see if there are some essays kind of in the ballpark of the kind of essay that I think I would want to write
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah.
Which of course I'm utterly unqualified to
Yeah.
do, but
Yeah.
but I have kind of thought, and I suppose you can't
Yeah.
read something like this, you know, and not think, you know, well, what would my argument be?
Yeah.
You know, if I were going to some look at this and you know, see what we do with that. But up next, we've got Mansfield Park.
Is Mansfield Park next? I was curious about that.
There's
Okay.
Sense and Sensibility, 1811.
Yeah.
Pride and Prejudice, 1813. And then 1814, Mansfield Park. And I believe this is the longest
Yeah.
of the books. So
It's possible that I actually own the Norton
okay.
of that, but it's doubtful. I think I'm just gonna have to order it. But
Well,
we'll
we'll
line
see-
up.
we'll
Let's
see what
get
we've
the
got.
same one.
Yeah.
And
Let's take a look at it.
but I'm looking forward to
Figure things
Mansfield.
out.
My memory of that one. So I read that that's my most recent Austen. I read that as a master's student in a class, and I remember thinking it was a little more serious in some ways than these first two books.
That's what I
Like there
hear.
were politics in it
Yeah.
and things like that, but
Yeah.
I don't remember any of the details. So
Well, I know for a fact I've never read it.
Okay.
So this is going to be an absolute first look for me.
okay,
And so I'm curious to see where that goes.
okay, good deal.